looking at the technological advances. I used to be on dial-up looking for...
I think we're starting to see the cost of getting rid of kayfabe. So out of all of this stuff that we've been seeing over the last several days of what happened at the Dark Side of the Ring episode, is I'm starting to think about like shooter interviews and seeing how people are taking what they see and what they hear from these shooter interviews. For starters, they're taking it at face value, which is always a mistake. You know, when people are doing interviews, they're always doing interviews. Specifically, once I found out people are being paid to do interviews. If you're paid to do an interview, you're being paid to tell stories, to talk about things. You're incentivized to make things up. Even if you don't have anything to talk about, you're incentivized to make things up. So a lot of these stories that are being told, they may be salacious, they're gossipy, a lot of them cannot be verified, and it also gives people an opportunity to take shots at people who they have a problem with. So over the years, we've seen a lot of this stuff where guys have spread rumors about people, and sometimes the rumors are true, sometimes they aren't. But most recently, spinning out of Dark Side of the Ring, there was a little nugget dropped by Rob Van Dam, that places that he used to work at, where guys used to H-bomb girls. And then people went and dig up this shoot interview from Brutus the Barber Beefcake, where he's talking about the Rockers H-bombing girls in hotel rooms. And I'm just sitting here looking at that like, can anybody verify that story actually happened? No. Like, the wrestling business is filled with kayfabe from top to bottom. I'm talking to operate in this wrestling space, you have to realize that about 60% of the stuff you're going to be told is going to be either skewed or it did not occur, right? So when I read books, when I watch podcasts, listen to podcasts, when I read, I understand that some people are not going to tell the whole story. Either it did not occur or it did occur, but it occurred in a different context. But there's a lot of different things that go on in these shooter interviews that most people do not discuss. I've never been a shooter interview guy. I listen to shooter interviews to do research, like if I'm doing research on a subject and I can't find a lot of information, but I do find shooter interviews, I will listen to them then. And those are only for like subjects, not really on people that often. But even when you're listening to shooter interviews on people or subjects or whatever, there's still a lot of kayfabe involved in that. You know, this is how we get into, like, what was it, a while back? I did a video on Big Cat Lad, Butch Reed, right? And I listened to a couple of interviews of Butch Reed, and he was remarkably consistent that he played football, right? And then you see wrestling journalists coming out and say, oh, well, despite the fact that Butch Reed said he played football for this team, he never actually made the team. Or he made the practice squad and he got cut before the first game. He didn't even get to play a preseason game or something, however that went, right? And then you realize, like, oh my God, I put bad information out there because I was listening to the source. I listened to the actual guy who, you know, we're talking about here. And then you see that he's extrapolating what actually occurred, you know, and you realize that wrestlers do that a lot. They do it a lot. So when you watching Dark Side of the Ring, when you're listening to shoot interviews, it's for entertainment purposes. It is not meant for you to act on. What we're seeing here now is that the shoot interview era of wrestling, which took place shortly after WCW closed until even current day, that shoot interview era is being used to incriminate people. Right, we've seen it with numerous guys on the independents. I believe Michael Elgin was one of those guys too, where, you know, he said something in a shoot interview or he told a story or something like that, and then years later it comes back to haunt him because people are like, oh, I remember hearing this about this in this shoot interview and yada yada yada, and that's the cost of not keeping kayfabe. That's the cost of, hey, we got to have a podcast, we got to talk about this and that and the third, and then, you know, a few years later, a few months later, somebody comes around to scoop that audio and using it out of context. And you don't know, you have no control over it. Once something leaves you, you no longer have any control over it, you know? So we have to make sure, that's one thing for somebody to have a shooter interview and we can back up some of that information with, you know, hard sources, data, that kind of stuff. But what you typically see, and Dark Side of the Ring is very famous for this. For instance, the Jimmy Snuka episode where they had the Tongan Kid, right? Where the Tongan Kid says, oh, I was in the car with Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino. Chances are he wasn't even there. He misremembers which time he went to Allenstown, Pennsylvania or whatever. And sometimes wrestlers will tell you this straight up. They don't remember. They take a lot of hits to the head. Their careers are long. Sometimes if they go on a loop, they might not remember which time they went through that loop, what happened. Dark Side of the Ring has also did another thing where during the plane ride from hell episode, they kept saying Vince McMahon was on the plane. And then after the episode aired, people kept saying Vince McMahon was not on that plane. Vince McMahon was not there, but they say, oh, some people say he was there. Some people say he wasn't there. But that's the thing about shoot interviews and documentaries and all that kind of stuff is you have to make sure. And I always give credit to who I got the information from. And I almost never speak on things as if they're absolute fact. They're always allegations, right? It's always an allegation that somebody did something. And if somebody can explain it, like they say something actually occurred, and then the other person confirms that it occurred, but adds context to it. A good example of this is the Rick Bassman, Jim Cornette thing, where I did a video recently about UPW, the Ultimate Pro Wrestling Camp. So what took place was Rick Bassman was accused of taking advantage of of wrestlers by demanding money from them, almost like an extortion attempt. But then I went and listened to Rick Bassman tell his story, to explain it, and it makes perfect sense. If he had a management contract with these guys, then yeah, they owe him some money, because he negotiated their contracts for them. He got them in the company, into WWE rather. And, maybe you say 2 years is too long, however that goes. But he had a management contract with them. It wasn't just him, extorting unknown wrestlers or guys who are trying to get into the business. He's actually working on their behalf. But if you just listen to certain other people talk about it, namely Jim Cornette, you wouldn't understand that. And that's the problem with shoot interviews. People are talking. They're just saying anything. And then it gets collected. But then you ask people, can any of this stuff be independently verified, or is it just a story that's being told in an interview by somebody who is being paid to be there, and they feel like they have to say something? Because we all know wrestling was wild in the 80s, but sometimes people get things mixed up. Sometimes, unless it's actually hit a newspaper, or it made some type of national or local news, chances are it's a completely confusing thing. And most people have no idea whether it was really documented or not. So you actually have to take a lot of stuff with a grain of salt. And because now it's being used to incriminate people, I definitely think that the shoot interview era of wrestling needs to end. And you can't go back to kayfabe, especially since every wrestler now has a podcast. You can't go back to kayfabe, but you can decide not to participate in salacious interviews where people are asking questions that are incriminating. And they've been doing that stuff for a long, long time. There have been a lot of people saying, oh, hey, yeah, who did you hit this guy? Did you do this? Did you do that? Who shit in his bag? Who did this? Who did that? Just those kinds of questions should be completely off limits. Tell your story about what you did backstage or whatever. Minimize it to you. These questioners, the interviewers, they run off gossip. And this gossip stuff is now starting to damage the business. You got boys out here, man. They're killing their friends' careers. They're killing their own careers just for a couple of bucks to sit in front of a camera and tell a story. And they have no idea who's watching it or what that person will do with it. You tell a joke that you think is funny and it's found out that somebody else doesn't think it's funny. They think it's a crime. They start trying to investigate. They ruin people's careers. And it's what? What do you benefit from it? Look, the people who are doing these interviews, whether it's Hannibal, whether it's Sean Oliver, whether it's anybody else, they want their money back. And they can only get their money back if they get the clicks. And they want the clicks. Where do you think they're going to get the clicks from? Asking salacious questions. It's funny to ask, oh, how big is Batista's dick? That's one question that people can ask. And, oh, that's ha 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 ha. That's so funny. But then they start asking you about who did this? Did somebody do this? And it's incriminating. And wrestlers just go along with it because they're being paid to sit there. I don't see why even they participated in this stuff. There was a reason that kayfabe existed. There was a reason, and now they're paying the cost for it. Everybody who's going to end up getting their careers ruined by Dark Side of the Ring because they participated, or some other shoot interview because they participated, is going to be on them, you know? And it's just going to be really unfortunate because there's going to be a lot of guys who will take the L. And wrestlers are going to do it to themselves. You know, there's no doubt in my mind that people will continue to do shoot interviews, continue to do podcasts, continue to do videos, answer incriminating questions, and then 4 or 5 years later, somebody's going to dig it up and say, oh yeah, this guy did this guy did that. Rob Van Dam making that comment in Dark Side of the Ring is going to cause 100 problems. Because first, people are going to say, the first time he does an interview, people are going to say, hey, who was H-bombing people? And if he doesn't tell, then he's protecting people, right? So then it's going to be a double-edged sword. Either he's going to have to rat somebody out for H-bombing girls, or it's going to be you knew girls were being H-bombed and you didn't do anything. That's a huge problem. Why participate? Why even be involved in that? It doesn't make sense. Guys need to shut the fuck up. You know, this was a big thing about the business. This is why kayfabe existed. And it's one thing for fans to have interest in, hey, tell me about Jim Crockett Jr., how was payoffs? That's one thing. But kayfabe existed to protect the business because not everything was needed to be known by the fans. People don't need to know everything. Some things are better left unsaid, and some stories are better left untold. But now we have interviews and we are in this gossip era where pro wrestling has become Lipstick Alley. And everybody's talking. Now I wake up on Monday morning and find out that Rene Dupree has said Undertaker he told everybody to bully me and they picked on me. And I'm just saying to myself, like, Rene Dupree has not worked in WWE in what, 15 years? So where did all this stuff come from? It seems to me like he just might be making shit up. Now, did it occur? I don't know. Can he prove it? No. Is anybody going to be able to say, well, yes, I did this because Undertaker told me so? No. So what is going on here is Rene Dupree has been talking shit about WWE since he left. Oh, they made Randy Orton or so-and-so the youngest tag team champion so they'd eliminate my record. Ain't nobody's thinking about you, man. Like, that kind of stuff is going on all the time. We see wrestlers do this stuff all the time, and they know it. They know that they can swift boat somebody's career by spreading allegations, by putting things out there, and then forcing other people to respond to it, right? But people love to hear about backstage fights, who was having sex with who, and this is why, you know, some guys are just as gossipy as girls are, you know? And, you know, growing up with dudes, I knew that. You know, they just gossip differently. But this whole era of we're going to participate in incriminating videos and incriminating conversations needs to end. People need to be smarter than this. It is incredibly frustrating that grown men will incriminate other grown men for something they're not entirely sure about. For instance, I had a conversation with, I believe, a subscriber the previous day, whenever this video comes out, about what happened in Saudi Arabia, right? And you see that, I say, if you look it up, all you need to do is look up what happened in Saudi Arabia. For starters, it's been 2 years. Most of the people who were at that show in Crown Jewel 2019, they don't work there anymore. Okay? The Good Brothers could have told a story. They don't work there anymore. Wyndham don't work there anymore. He could have told a story. You got AJ Styles when he when he was doing Twitch or whatever, he could have told the story. Nobody knows what happened. So what happened? So what you get is Hugo Savinovich, who didn't work in WWE at the time. He said that he heard from somebody that this was what happened. And you're like, what? And somehow this becomes credible information on the internet. And I ask a simple question. If you think 50 wrestlers got kidnapped in Saudi Arabia and CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and nobody reported it, does that make sense? No. You think a large international incident where over 10 American citizens were kidnapped in Saudi Arabia and it just happened, and in the age of Donald Trump, and nobody thought to go and look into that. No major corporate media caught on to that story and decided to talk about it. And people just go with it. because it's the wrestling space, and the wrestling space is full of kayfabe. It includes wrestling journalists. They create their own kayfabe. It includes podcasters. They create their own kayfabe. The only thing we can do is listen to the stories for entertainment. And this stuff is not meant for you to act on. It's not meant for you to be out here trying to investigate and figure out what happened when there's no paper trail, when there's no survivors, no witnesses, all that kind of stuff. The Vince McMahon with the briefcase full of money thing is all just what people have said occurred. And people believe it. People believe that he just walked around like Scrooge McDuck with gigantic sacks of money. And it's like, that's almost cartoonish. It's silly. We don't even hear about all that kind of stuff about mob bosses. We never even heard a mob boss shows up with a briefcase full of money and in front of a bunch of people and then left. It'd have been one thing if you could say, well, we got a history here of Vince McMahon giving money to a specific judge or a specific political person that's running in this town, and maybe you could say that's a bribe or a payoff. Okay, cool. If that was the case, but that's not the case. That's not what we saw. That's not what they said happened. So the question is, why are we believing things whole cloth without critical thinking, without thinking about it? So all these bullying accusations, did some of it occur? Sure, some of it occurred. But can we prove that it occurred? No. Should we be acting on it? No. Because we don't know what kind of personal beef some people might be harboring towards somebody else for a different reason. You know? And it happens all the time. It happens all the time. People are blaming wrestlers for the downfall of their careers. There have been guys like Alex Riley who, I didn't become in the main event because of John Cena. It's all John Cena's fault. And it's like, okay, is that true? We don't know. You know, so that's the thing that we have to take into account. And this is the high cost of not keeping kayfabe, is that now people are out there telling stories. We don't know what's true and what's not. Everybody's chasing every lead. People are being incriminating and saying all this stuff. And, you know, a lot of it is 30 years old, 25 years old. Nobody's been thinking about this stuff. Nobody cares about this stuff, or it's been documented again and again and again and again and again. And it's not until somebody adds some type of salacious slant to it that it comes back up. More importantly, considering in the United States, it is very difficult to sue for slander and libel. It is very difficult to sue for slander and libel. And because of that, these stories are incentivized to continue. It's because you can't sue. I saw a lot of people say, well, can Ric Flair sue Dark Side of the Ring for this? And it was like, no, he can't. He can't sue. For starters, there was a lawsuit. Secondly, the lawsuit was settled out of court. The only thing he could do is tell his side of the story, which most people are going to be primed not to believe, because everyone sees all these shooter interviews from Bam Bam Bigelow and Shane Douglas and all these other things of Ric Flair getting naked and swinging his dick in a circle. It doesn't matter if it didn't happen on that plane. The fact of the matter is it happened at some point somewhere. And folks can be like, no, it's not right. Or hell, Ric Flair could be confused and it did happen. We don't know. But it's not, these stories were not meant for you to call the police on or to be judge, jury, and executioner over who did what. But it's just, people need to shut up. You can't return to kayfabe, but you can refuse to participate in incriminating conversations. And but this is kind of how it is now. This is the wrestling business now. Everybody telling stories, everybody talking too much, and it's going to end up taking down just about everybody, because everybody's got some kind of bone in their closet. Either it's going to be bullying, abuse, doesn't matter. You know, there's everybody's got something. You know, nope, there ain't no angels walking around here, and we're only just traipsing through the flower bed until we step on another landmine.
Skin tone, so why attach yourself and piggyback the wealth you didn't earn or lack yourself? I'm telling you to own up to your own success and failures. It's a reason why these sleazy